Church. Welcome to this week's broadcast. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Great to be with you again as we go back in the time machine. If you're just joining us, we have been replaying broadcasts that Pastor Doug and myself did. If you don't know the history of the Feeding Station, Pastor Doug White and myself started this thing at New Day Covenant Church back in 2011, 2012. And we are revisiting some of those broadcasts from 2016. We did a bunch of broadcasts on books of the Bible. And being that we're doing the New Testament this year, we decided to go through the book of Matthew here on the broadcast channel. And so we are in Matthew 5 this week, verses 31 and 32, talking about one of those kind of taboo subjects. Divorce.
Pastor Doug White in Boulder, Colorado. We're talking about a subject that is rampant on the land today, divorce. We're in Matthew chapter 5, starting around 31, probably through 32. Henry Loke is in another studio. What is your title, Henry?
Divorce.
Just divorce. Okay.
Just divorce. That's what he's talking about.
Wow.
So.
Okay.
Yeah,
I was thinking out of bounds, baby. Out of bounds. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to read it into the broadcast. I got a couple of interesting illustrations. I hope it will help, because this is one of those subjects where either people have experienced it personally, or someone very close to them has, or they have really strong opinions, or they've been wounded by it. Right. It's a very controversial area. So we've been saying through the latest broadcast, Jesus is just going down the list. He's talking about the fulfillment of the law that's found in Christ, the love. And he's talked about adultery. He's talked about reconciliation problems in relationships. He's talking about works righteousness in the first part of the fulfillment of the law. He's talked about murder, and now he's going after divorce. So here's where he goes in 31. It's been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces this wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. Okay? Mm-hmm. So there's some really interesting stuff here.
Well, yeah, I think, again, this is one of these things that might be specific to the time, in that, women were just treated like property.
Yep. And
had no rights, really, and it was very easy for a man to divorce a woman, but almost impossible for a woman to divorce a man.
Correct. That's the historical context.
Right.
So here's the first illustration that I want to bring into place after I ask the question. Mm-hmm. I believe the question we should be asking when it comes to the subject of divorce is, what is God's divine intent and purpose for marriage? Okay.
Good question.
Okay. Is divorce part of that? God's divine intention and his purpose. Okay? So here's where I'm going to go with the first illustration. Guy comes to me years and years ago and says, Pastor, do you believe in God's perfect will? I said, of course I do. And they go, well, do you believe that God has a permissible will? And I go, yeah, where are we going with this? And he said, well, I know what I'm thinking I'm going to do is not God's perfect will, but I think it might be in his permissible will, and I was wondering what you thought. And I said, well, just so you know, I'm not sure where you're going with this, but Adam and Eve probably had a similar question. God gave them his perfect will, and then he allowed permissible will, which resulted in everybody dying. Okay? So I told this person, it reminds me of the person who says, is golf about how many mulligans I can hit? Okay? Or when I start my golf game, how many provisional balls will I get? So what I think about the questions, if we don't frame it first appropriately, we're looking for exceptions when we're getting ready to head out of bounds. Okay, That's what you do in golf. So as people, we tend to ask loophole questions about matters that should be important. Right. Instead of asking, for example, what do you mean grounds for divorce? So I'm going to take us for a second to Matthew 19 first. Mm-hmm. Verse 3, some Pharisees, if I can say it right, they came to Jesus to test him, and they asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? That's where they began the movie with him. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now in Mark 10, some Pharisees come to Jesus in verses 2. Let me read through 5. And the Pharisees come to Jesus to test him, and they asked, is it lawful? Now, it's very important. They don't say, is it right? They ask, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? And then, what did Moses command you? Jesus replied. Now, you're going to notice he doesn't quickly answer their loaded question. He counters with what I'm going to call a better lawful question. Okay? Then they said, Moses permitted. They didn't say Moses commanded. They said Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and to send her away. Verse 5. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law, Jesus said. And in that your heart was hard, it means filled with sin. Okay? Now we're back to Matthew 5. That's what he's talking about. Divorce usually comes from a heart that starts getting filled with sin. And that's why earlier he's been saying all these things. Don't do this stuff. It fills your heart with sin.
Right.
That's the heart of the matter.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, Barclay says that the marriage piece in this time, while it was very revered, it also became a train wreck because it was just so easily dismissed because it was a term basically, the definition of what a woman can do was taken so loosely that, if she just angered her husband just had her basically write a little letter, sign it, hand it to her in the presence of two witnesses, and it was done.
Correct.
But she didn't have the same recourse. So he could be beating the crap out of her, and it was very hard for her to divorce her husband.
So you look at, back to that first question, what is God's divine intent and purpose for marriage?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, if you were to then go to today's culture here in the United States, people get married often to share in insurance benefits or to qualify for a loan or to share in the right of survival in the assets without having to go through probate, and does the money transfer over?
Right.
They get married so there's protection and they don't have to testify against each other. There's all kinds of stuff. Okay, or they get married out of guilt because they've been sleeping together and their mom and dad are upset. So now I'm going to take us to the historical background, which I'm going to say is a quagmire of this whole trap. When the Pharisees were asking Jesus, and I'm going to say, why is Jesus teaching this? In Matthew, he's trying to tell us to get our hearts right. But the historical background is ancient Judaism didn't look upon marriage for the equality or the mutual benefit of a husband and a wife.
Right.
They looked upon marriage as propelling the generational family bloodline. That way they could retain the property in the bloodline. And the greatest enemy was to be childish. And if a person didn't have a child, they're not going to pass on the bloodline. Man, that's horrible. So these guys would dump a chick if she was barren and grab somebody else so they could get another male. So the Jewish male was the lord over the household. He was the dominating master. And Jesus was teaching that both husband and wife are equally responsible before God as their Lord and Master. If you were to go to like Ephesians 5, he's saying we both submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So in this case, when the Pharisees are trying to trap Jesus in Mark 10, if he answers with a moral precept about divorce, he will be in the same position as, let's say, John the Baptist, who was beheaded for exposing the immorality of Herod Antipas.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
If he accepts the legal, is it lawful? Remember, that's what they asked him. Not is it right, is it lawful?
Right.
If he accepts the legal premise regarding divorce, then he comes under the yoke of the law in how the Pharisees want to interpret it. But if Jesus refuses to make divorce about morality, then he's aligned himself with the rabbinic teachings of a guy named Hillel, who granted permission for a husband to divorce his wife for any reason. That's why they said in Matthew, can he leave her for any reason?
Right.
Okay? So all of this stuff is a trap. The provision of a divorce certificate was because of hardened hearts. Okay? It's the perfect answer.
Right.
And his answer, I believe, when Jesus says this, he protects a wife from being easily abandoned. Okay? And the divorce certificate allowed for at least some dignity when a woman was stigmatized, because in that culture, if a man can't remarry for example, a man can't remarry his former wife if she marries somebody else. This whole thing is a nightmare. What Jesus is teaching us in Matthew 5, back to our primary text, is knock it off. This stuff is not good.
Right.
This is no different than the one who says, gouge your eye out if it's causing you to sin. He's going, look, it's all bad from here.
Well, and like I'm thinking as you're talking about all this, I look at what we've made it now.
Go for it.
I mean, well,
rant on that.
Well,
yeah, look what we've made it.
Well, yeah, because I think now it's, and I'll go to the adultery, back to the adultery broadcast. We are so inundated with images and things that say marriage and relationships should be this. And to your question of what did God ordain marriage to be is a total 180 out of what the world says it should be. Yes. But when we get this stuff in our heads to go, well, it's not like that. She doesn't look like Pamela Anderson. She doesn't, whatever. You know what I mean?
Fill
whatever.
in the blank.
Just fill in the blank. She doesn't dress this way. She doesn't look this way. She doesn't act this way. Well, who said she's supposed to act and dress and look that way?
God never had any of that in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now we become very disenchanted with our partners because...
And your hearts get hard.
Right, because of what the world says it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to say, what is God's intent? You go back to be fruitful and multiply.
Right.
Okay, we go back to Genesis. We look at some other areas. I mean, the marriage part is actually taught by Jesus, and there is levels that are ordained by God.
Right.
But mostly what we're doing isn't about being fruitful and multiplying.
No, it's about just getting...
Or to raise an offspring up in the way they should go.
Right.
And, I mean, we could go into, and is marriage supposed to be male and female, all those things that are there.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
But look what we've turned it into.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, and...
Wow.
Well, and here's another question. So, at some point, too, it changed, because if you read the Old Testament, they've got wives and
polygamy big time.
Yeah, I mean, Sarah's given Abraham her maid because she is barren at that time, but I mean, you look at the problems it causes when we start trouble. I mean, when we try to help God out, it becomes a nightmare. But that. When you look at that, I think about me. It's like I can barely handle the one wife I have. Why would I want to try my hand at something, and just complicate things? I mean, you look at it, but at some point it changed.
Yes.
At some point it did change, because there was this multiple marriage thing, and I think you look at it and go, what a nightmare. I mean, when you look at Hagar and takes Ishmael out and she puts them under a bush and she walks away because she doesn't want to see him die. Mm-hmm. I mean, seriously? Yeah. You think we can handle more than one wife or one husband?
Yeah. Well, so let me make this my closing thought, because people are always looking for the exceptions. How many mulligans, how many provisionals, whatever it is. Verse 32, I tell you that anyone who divorces their wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress. Now, that's in the context of what was going on there, especially when, all the things are there. But what I'm looking at is, what is unfaithfulness? Marital unfaithfulness. And in the Bible, you could follow that in lots of ways. I believe that we are unfaithful to our spouses, male and female, when our eyes do what is earlier teaching, when our eyes start to cause us to sin, or our hands cause us to sin. If, let's say, for example, if you're married to a spouse, and I'll make it as generic as possible, but let's say somebody was married to someone who was a kleptomaniac, okay? That's a psychological term for someone who's a serial thief or stealer. And I know of a situation very close where they were married to somebody and they stole all the time. In a sense, I call that marital unfaithfulness. Now, most of the time, we give it the sexual connotation. It means who's sleeping in whose bed and all that. But I think unfaithfulness comes in many ways. Unfaithfulness to God is, are we obedient to God? Do we? And I don't mean to equate the male as the God, What I mean to equate is either spouse becomes unfaithful when we're not there helping each other, sometimes intentionally, and we're being hurtful and causing what I'm going to call like a spiritual cancer to enter the relationship. So I think there are times when hearts are hard and people are unequally yoked. And there are times where in a fallen world, I get the certificate of divorce. Was it God's original intention or plan? Of course not. But for the people who are yoked inappropriately from the get-go, and that's why we need to take marriage serious. We need to take relationships serious. And if we have a law-driven marriage that's only on the law and not fulfilled in the law, which is the love, we've missed the covenant of love that's found in Christ. And that's, I think, all that Jesus is, not all that he's doing, but primarily he's just going, hearts are hard, boys and girls, knock it off.